This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Lewitt, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt PureTube microphone through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show, and there's some great deals waiting for you there. Now get ready to rock.
He said, "Do you know what we're working on?" And I was like, "No, something for Paul. Why?" And he went, "Listen." And he hit play. And it was definitely not Paul's voice coming out of the speakers. It was definitely John Lennon singing. And I went, "Okay." And he went, "Listen to these guitars." And he soloed these guitars. I was like, wow, that sounds very much like the Beatles.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio's S-Series, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors featuring 5 models from the compact S2V all the way up to the powerful S5H. The range builds on Atom Audio's iconic heritage with new technology for improved acoustic performance. With new woofers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine, the S-Series ensures accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail, and a forward-looking digital connectivity. Backed by a 5-year guarantee, Atom Audio monitors embody durability and professional sound for your studio at atomaudio.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy Rockstars, it's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Steve Genewick, a Grammy-nominated recording engineer with 30 years of experience, both as a studio and live recording and mix engineer. Steve has had the pleasure of working at iconic recording studios around the world, such as United Recording, East West Studios, Sunset Sound and Village Recorders in Los Angeles, Abbey Road and Angel Studios in London, and La Fabrique Studios in France. For 20 years, Steve had the great honor of working alongside the legendary 23 Grammy Award-winning producer and engineer Al Schmitt. They worked with artists such as Diana Krall, Botti, Gladys Knight, Neil Young, George Benson, Quincy Jones, Burt, Bacharach, and Paul McCartney. Steve also joined Al for Mix with the Masters seminars for 9 years in the south of France, in addition to collaborating on their instructional film, The Art of Recording a Big Band. Steve worked primarily out of the famed Capitol Studios in Hollywood as a staff engineer from 1994 to 2022. At Capitol, he worked with countless renowned artists such as Elton John, Bastille, and Trisha Yearwood. Steve was among the first studio mixers to begin mixing music in Dolby Atmos, working on projects with Beck, Gregory Porter, LL Cool J, Sam Smith, and Niall Horan, and on the popular video game Apex Legends, as well as many more that we're going to talk about today. In 2017, Steve received the Pensado Award for Best Recording Engineer. He was also part of the Universal Audio and Capitol Studios team that won a 2020 Tech Award for their Capitol Chambers plugin. Check out Steve's earlier episode on RSR231 when we talked about working with Al Schmitt, the Capitol Chambers plugin, and many other cool items, and being at Capitol Studios. Thanks also again, and a shout out to Matt Boudreau, my brother from another podcast at the Working Class Audio Podcast, for making our original introduction. Please welcome Steve Genewick back to Recording Studio Rockstars. Steve, my friend, are you ready to rock yet again?
I am ready to rock. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, dude, glad to have you here, man. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm tired after that intro. I forgot about most of that stuff.
Well, you know, I know it's long, and sometimes I shorten them, but I could tell that it was fairly current too. So I want to make sure we were giving a shout out to all this stuff that you've been doing.
Yes.
Now there is a playlist which we'll include in the show notes, and this particular one I think goes over to an Apple Music playlist, and that's because it's going to let you rock stars listen to Steve's Atmos mixes there. If you have, I'll let you answer this too, Steve. What do they need to have if they want to go check out the Atmos mixes?
So on Apple Music, you have to be a subscriber to Apple Music, obviously. You can listen to the binaural mixes on your phone, an iPhone. You just make sure that the Dolby Atmos setting is on, and it defaults to being on now. So it could be that you're listening to it, you don't even know it.
And is that
and then
even on the phone speaker?
This phone speaker, no.
No,
it's
this
just
would be this would be like
headphones.
AirPod Pros or something.
Exactly. If you have AirPod Pros or AirPod Maxes, you get all the head tracking and all that kind of stuff. If you just have regular headphones, that will work too. You will hear, and you'll be hearing the binaural version of it. So, you know, in Dolby Atmos, there's the speaker component, which is our master mix, which is how we, you know, that's the master. The master ADM file is based off of our speaker mix. And then we do the binaural at the same time. But that's strictly for headphones. So you don't want to listen to the binaural mix in speakers. It's going to sound really odd.
So now I pulled up Apple on my desktop and tried to play the Atmos to a pair of headphones through an interface in my studio. And I don't think I got that right. But if I listen off the phone with my AirPod Pros, I could hear Atmos, and it's pretty cool experience to check all that out.
Through the interface is a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, you might
have to have it set up in the OS a specific way, and it took me a half a day, and I did it months ago, and there's no way I could tell you what I did now.
Well, you know, we don't have to go too far down that road, but I'm sure you have. You know, you've been doing this for a minute, and so you probably have some thoughts about the balance of the technology for creating Atmos as a new format versus the consumer technology of keeping up with that and making sure that the two always meet. Do you have any comments you want to make just about that in general for our listeners?
In general, I think what people have to remember is we're still in the very early stages of this. I mean, I started mixing, you know, Atmos has been around for a while. It was obviously a film medium. So for films, it's been around for 15 years or something like that. But we started mixing music-only content, I believe, in the middle of 2017. And I was actually the first one to do music-only for release. There had been music mixes, but they were just kind of demos to show off the system.
First kid on the block.
Exactly. They kind of just dropped me on the block and said, have fun. So again, we haven't been going at it that long. And when we started, there was no outlet for it. You know, for the first 2 or 3 years, we mixed Atmos. Nobody could hear it because unless you knew one of us and could come to Capitol or knew somebody at Dolby, we were doing it to get the content. So, you know, in hindsight, there were deals in place that we didn't know about, but you know, when Amazon Music was the first to release it, they wanted to have 3,000 songs when they went live. So me and, you know, basically 3 or 4 other guys at Capitol just were mixing our butts off for a couple of years, which was really fun, actually.
Yeah, so that must have been fascinating. I mean, you're making all this stuff, you know that it sounds cool, and you're not sure when everybody's going to experience it or how they're going to experience it.
Or how. Yeah, it was kind of the Wild West. You know, we did the best we could. You know, we were making up our own rules, and literally making up our own rules, making up standards, stuff like that. And luckily for us, when it was released, it worked. So the stuff that we had done had worked. I mean, we were working with some pretty smart people at Dolby and Universal. So it wasn't like we were completely flying blind. It was, we were kind of on top of it, but it was really fun. And it was really fun when it was that small little team of people. Because we would talk every day, and, we were always doing demos, and, we could really control the narrative. And now it's out in the world, and it's a little bit I wouldn't say out of control. There's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of people saying this is how it should be done, and this is not how it should be done, and all that other stuff. And I don't know, they're probably all valid, but
hey,
for
if you're
me,
the first one on the block with an automobile, you just drive in any direction you want, whenever you want.
Exactly.
And then when everybody has them, all of a sudden you got to wait at the stoplight, right?
Exactly. So, and I'm sure that took a minute to get those rules together too.
Yeah.
Which side of the road you drive on? I don't care. I just drive down the middle, until somebody else is on the road, it doesn't matter.
Thank God it's the right side of the road over here.
I know.
Wait, I guess it wouldn't have mattered, would it?
Well, if we had started that way, then England probably would have done it the other way.
Yeah.
But as far as the consumer, the consumer stuff hasn't caught up yet, really. There's stuff out there right now. A lot of it is Apple. A lot of it is headphones. There's some sound bars, the Sonos systems and JBL systems and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the consumer stuff really hasn't, the technology hasn't caught up yet. It needs to be in cars, and cars take a long time to develop. So, they've been working on it for a while. So it'll be there in the next year or two, probably.
I have a Tesla Model 3, and there was a blog article about how it's in the Tesla, and there is a sort of a surround feature, but when I listen, I'm just slightly confused as to whether it's doing what I think it's supposed to be doing, or it's doing some other version. And I think that might be the experience for a moment for people, but there isn't there a, and again, we'll date this episode a little bit, the interview, if things change a lot between now and when it's published, but I think maybe the Mercedes or something like that is one of the first ones that's focused on that.
There's a couple of Mercedes that came out. The unfortunate part is it's the Maybach, which is like a $350,000 car. So that one, it's really cool though. I mean, I've heard it many times.
You've heard it,
and then
you approved?
I approved, yeah. And then I had to get out because I was afraid I was going to spill something in the car. But then there's I think there's an EOS model Mercedes, which is still not an inexpensive car. So they're hitting the luxury cars first, which makes sense. It's kind of a luxury item. But, we had meetings, and we were doing demos for Ford and Chrysler and all those Honda and all. We were doing demos for them years ago, BMW. And like, I remember talking to I think it was one of the Ford guys, and we were just chit-chatting after we had played music. And he said, yeah, well, it takes like 5 years to develop a new model of a car.
Yeah.
So he said, even if we said tomorrow, like, yeah, let's do this, it would be at least 5 years before that particular car came out. So if you look at that, like I said, in the next year or two, it'll probably be closer.
That's pretty cool. And then, so just for a concept, for the rock stars too, it's like if Atmos and that kind of experience lives in the car, it's going to involve things like a left speaker, a right speaker, probably a center speaker, speakers on the top, ceiling bars or something, so that you can get the upper speakers, and then a stereo behind you, and the sub. Oh, and then sides, I guess. I don't know, maybe the doors or something.
Yeah. I mean, each car is different, obviously. And, in the car, the nice thing about the cars is it's a known entity. So, you can tune the system to the car, because the car is not going to change.
Right. Exactly.
So it's nice. They're not, I mean, the car guys do all their audio tricks in the cars anyways. So.
Yeah. Do you think the Atmos mixing experience will be like stereo mixing, where you do your mix and then you go listen in the car?
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, when I first started it, we had the one room at Capitol, and if I wanted to hear my mix in a different place, it was kind of cool because Dolby has this flagship movie theater, the Vine Street Theater, which was literally like across the street from Capitol, which is like a 75-seat luxury theater. It's like the greatest movie theater ever.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to hear my mix someplace else, I could call Dolby and be like, hey, is anybody at the theater? They'd be like, yeah, so-and-so's over there. I'm like, great, can I come over and listen to a mix? They'd be like, yeah, sure. And I'd like upload a mix to them and walk across the street and sit in this movie theater by myself and listen to the mix, which is completely unrealistic, but it was fun.
That's awesome. I love that. It sounds great.
Yeah, but I check, when I'm mixing in Atmos, I'm obviously mixing on speakers, but I'm very conscious of the headphone, the binaural mix. Yeah. If I need to, I have a Sonos system like in my family room. I can, drop an MP4 on a stick and go back there and listen to it. I don't do it as much anymore just because I'm pretty comfortable. I've mixed hundreds of songs at this point. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with what I have and with my studio here at home now that's been set up and tuned by Dolby and all that good stuff. So I'm pretty happy with what I'm getting.
Well, it's just a funny reminder too, like the creative process in mixing. It really, in my experience, it is still a constant back and forth like this. Do a thing, see what I think. Do a thing, see what I think. Do you feel like that changes? I mean, maybe you just answered that with your description of not needing to check it on something else, or do you feel like regardless of where you're doing it, mixing is always a process, and it's always going to be a process of making moves and then seeing what you think and then coming back and looking at it again? And
of course, it's I equate mixing as to just walking in circles, basically. It's just I'm basically working until I run out of stuff to do. It's kind of, and it's the same in Atmos, it's the same in stereo. Like I used to say, I start my mixes the same way everybody else does, with my head in my hands going, oh my God, there's no way I can make this sound good. How is this ever going to work? Like, why did they hire me? I'm a failure. And then, an hour later, it's like, okay, this is pretty good. I can do this, but every single one of them is a task, so to speak, but it's fun. And the same in Atmos. In Atmos, it's just, now you have different kind of decisions to make. Because in stereo, a lot of times you're trying to make space in the stereo field. Well, now we have just a different kind of space. So, techniques are the same, but the process and the thought process behind it is a little bit different, because now you're filling a room with sound and you have to make sure that you haven't split it up too much. If I push something to the rear speakers and every time that little thing goes by, it piques my interest and distracts me, it's probably not a good thing.
Right.
Unless it's supposed to be distracting. Sometimes you want to make sure, sometimes you split two guitars and you realize very quickly that they're supposed to work as one guitar. They're not supposed to be separated by an entire room, So at that point, it comes down to the taste of the mixer, really. And people criticize it, whatever. There's some really bad Atmos mixes out there, like really bad ones. And
there's some bad stereo mixes. Did you know that?
There's tons of bad stereo mixes.
I mean, I might have created some of them too.
I might be responsible for a couple. But that doesn't mean that the format doesn't work just because somebody may, and I'm sure the person that mixed it thought it was great and they might like it, and other people may like it. It may just be that you don't like it. But
there's also bad drivers out there, but that doesn't mean cars are all bad.
Exactly. So I think, and it's a new format, so people are pushing the boundaries, and sometimes when you push the boundaries, you go too far.
Hey, Rockstar, come on over here. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, Declick, Declip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, and Limiting, all from Isotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off over at isotope.com. I think we start out, you started out as the very first creator, so congrats on that. The rest of us are going to start out as consumers first, I think. So we'll probably listen to some stuff and approach it from that perspective. And that's certainly been my experience. And the AirPod Pros, that's the first thing I've owned that would allow me to listen to it on my own, in my own time.
Mm-hmm. But that's a much different experience than a speaker system too.
Yeah. So, and it's cool to hear. These are some of the things I hear. I hear that there's more space to work with. So it is a different sound, a different sense of space. You notice that if you move your head, the sound or the speakers sort of stay in the same spot relative to your head.
That's the head tracking on those.
The head tracking, yeah. So that is, I find that to be really remarkable if I'm watching a video off my phone, because then the sound sort of stays where the phone is, and it feels like your phone is like a giant sound system playing a movie to you or whatever. With music, I'm still a little confused by it myself. Do you know anything about that? Is that, do you know if that's, and stop me if I'm asking you questions which are unfair, but do you know if that's a feature that you can turn on and off when you're listening back to an Atmos?
You absolutely can turn the head tracking off.
Okay, so you still hear the Atmos space, but you just turn off the head tracking?
Yeah, exactly. And then you just, it doesn't do the head track. For music, I don't like the head tracking at all.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's really distracting to me. Some people dig it, but I was even in meetings with Apple where I was like, just turn it off for music. It's like, what I'm not looking at my phone. And I had one time where I was listening to some stuff, and I have a little caddy on the side of my studio where like a phone charger. And I was listening to something, and I just stuck my phone on the charger, and I was like going back and forth looking at a piece of paper and my keyboard. And I was like, who did this mix? Why is this vocal moving all over the place? Until I realized the head tracking was on. But it was weird because every time I moved my head, the vocal was sliding around, and I didn't like that. So I usually turn it off personally.
Yeah, so that's good to know. So Rockstars, if you are checking out Atmos mixes on your iPhone for the first time and you're wondering that same thing, then you can turn it off. I'm going to go turn mine off. I'm going to venture a guess that we might have to turn it back on for watching a movie if we want that part to work. So we just get used to it. But I will say also that part of the learning experience for me as a consumer was learning that if you want to truly understand stereo versus Atmos on that iOS experience, you also go in and you can change the setting from Atmos always on to Atmos always off, and I forget what they call level matching or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then you kind of can flip between the stereo and the Atmos, and you go, oh, now I understand, because it's cool to understand it conceptually, but we're engineers. We like to control things, and then we believe that something's, what we think it is.
Exactly. And when you do that, 99.9% of the times, you're flipping between two completely different mixes. Right. That could have been done by two completely different people.
Probably.
So you're flipping most likely you're flipping between the original stereo mix and then the Dolby Atmos mix. Now, on more modern music, it could be the same mixer. Right. You never know.
That's what I was going to qualify. I was going to say, if you're listening to back catalog, remixes in Atmos, then it's going to be different.
Probably. Yeah.
And you've done some incredible ones. So, not too shabby to, you've done a ton of stuff, but not too shabby to flip over to your music playlist, your Atmos playlist. And the very first track is Miles Davis, Kinda Blue. Nice, man.
That was a fun one.
Tell us a little bit about that one. That must have, we have moments when we do this professionally, or even just doing it as a hobby. You have moments where you're like, this is it. Did that feel a little bit like that to you?
Kind of. I think we had cracked the code on how to do that stuff. So, very long story short, a couple months before that, I had worked on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus movie. They were reissuing the film, and they wanted a Dolby Atmos mix. And I think it might have been Greg Penny who was doing it with me. And he came up with, we had a 3-track from, 1968 or whatever it was. And it was only in 3-track. It was beautiful recording. Glenn Johns had done the recording. It was great. But we only had that 3-track, and we wanted to make it, but we were doing a movie, it was a film. So we came up with the idea of, we took the 3 tracks and we made them sound really good, just, EQ, whatever we had to do. And then we took that 3-track and we were in Studio C at Capitol, and across the hall are the two big studios. So we actually chose Studio B, and we put a pair of speakers out in the studio, and we hung like a dozen microphones. And then we played the 3-track mix that we had back into the room, and then, brought the microphones back to Studio C and spread them around the room and balanced them until we thought we had something cool. And that worked in the movie. And then we gave it to the dubbing mixers, and they put in some sound effects and all that, people applauding, and they did their movie thing to it, which was really great.
Yeah.
Well, a few months later, Maurice Patiste, who runs PMC, came to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about doing Miles Davis? I know the family, and he had helped another engineer, Dave Rideau. They had done the 5-1 mixes a few years ago." And I said, "Well, that would be great. If you can get approval, good luck." So, and there's a whole story about him getting the approval for it. But we finally got the approval from the family and from Sony. And we figured, well, let's try the same kind of thing, because we only have a 3-track. It was 1958. It was recorded at Columbia Studios in 58, I believe, 57. So we said, well, let's kind of do the same thing. So the best part about it was we got really high res digital files from the original tape. They retransferred them for us from the original tapes. Before we went into this, when we knew we were going to do it, I started listening to the record again. I love Kind of Blue, but I hadn't listened to it like with my engineer hat on. So I, got the CD, whatever phone, and I started listening. I was like, wow, I don't know about this. There's no bottom end in this. We may have to pull some tricks to make this sound good. To make it sound more kind of modern and, full for Atmos. And we went into the studio the first day, and we had the transfers they had sent us, and the three of us pushed the faders up, and we were floored at how good it sounded. So, just over years of being remastered and everything else, it kind of, the sound quality wasn't that great on the CDs that were out there.
That's interesting. How many? So this was a 3-track originally as well?
3-track originally, yeah. Analog 3-track. Not left, center, right. It would have been mixed for mono, right? So it was a 3-track multi-track. So one track had piano and tenor sax. One track had trumpet and bass. And one track had the alto sax and the drums. I think that's the way it went. So we took the 3-track and I spread them out just a little bit, just in stereo, just till it sounded weird. And then I tucked it back in just to have a little depth. And then we did the same thing. And for Miles, we actually decided to use Studio A at Capitol. And at Capitol, if you set the room up one way, there was 2 ISO booths on the left side that had big glass doors. So I actually set the speakers up facing the glass. So I actually bounced it off the glass. And again, we just set up a bunch of mics, some up high, some down low, all around the room. And then we went back into the Atmos room and played around with it until it felt to us like we were sitting in the room with the band. And then we were like, well, there's some spots here. Like there's in this spot here, it's way too loud. The sax is too loud. And we started going like, well, should we fix it? And we had actually gone and found an original mono pressing of the original vinyl. So every time we found a place we wanted to change something or make a move, we would go to the vinyl and listen. So it was like, okay, that sax entrance is really loud. Should we do a fader move? And we would go to the record and listen and go, nope, they left it that way. So, okay, so let's leave it. So we did this for the entire album. And it ended up, by the end, we didn't do anything. There were no fader rides. There was no EQ. There was no compression, no nothing. It's literally just, and it's really compelling when you hear it.
That's amazing. That's actually one of the questions I thought of right away. I was like, when you're remixing something like that, do you get, well, 2 things. One is like, do you match up every single moment in some fashion? And 2 is, do you ever just get, transfixed by the music and actually like space out and you go, oh shit, and then have to go back and look at it again?
That happens all the time, first of all. Yeah. But yeah, we try to stay as true to the original, at least the original intent as we possibly can. Depending on what it is, that one's a little bit easier because there's only 3 tracks, it was recorded live.
Yeah.
The reference was easy. Some of the other ones get more difficult to try to pick out every single moment,
Yeah, I think a crazy multi-track would be challenging.
Yeah, the hardest stuff is like stuff from like the 90s that was like half analog tape and half Pro Tools and, was bounced around and there's 90 tracks and stuff like that. Trying to get those at that point, that catalog work, it takes way longer and is way more difficult just to get back to the original stereo. Because usually what I do and what a lot of the guys do is we'll try to recreate the stereo mix first and then split it out into Atmos.
Right.
And
Start with the bass line that makes sense.
Exactly. And sometimes matching that stereo mix is near impossible. It's also kind of daunting to think that I have to match a mix Bob Clearmountain did in 1990. He's Bob Clearmountain. How do I do that?
And then the next question is, do you get to give him a call, or is it like, hey Bob, by the way, I'm doing your mix?
It depends on who it is. I've had situations where I knew who had done the original mix and I couldn't figure something out, and I just called them or emailed them and was like, dude, I'm doing this, and what the hell did you use on that vocal? Because I can't figure it out. But even I recently just had to remix a record that Al Schmitt mixed originally. And I mean, I was sitting next to him when he did it. And it was still really difficult because I don't have his ears,
Yeah.
And with him, it's all balance and, there was no EQs and stuff like that. So, plus it was daunting because it was Al and I'm trying to, there's a lot of personal stuff there too.
Yeah.
So, but it was really, it's difficult. It's hard. Now, once you get into the Atmos part of it, then you're freed up a little bit because you're like, okay, now I'm in my realm and
it's your decision.
Exactly. And I try to keep, again, the intent and the flavor of the original, but I'm changing. I'm not drastically changing EQs and stuff like that. But when you pull stuff out, you have to rebalance a little bit too. So that's where it gets creative and fun.
Well, so I mean, your playlist is remarkable. I mean, it's like Miles Davis. There's all kinds of great stuff. More modern and jazz leaning Nora Jones, and Dexter Gordon is in there, and Jaju Bertho and Stan Getz. I mean, just unreal. And let me see. I got to do a lot of scrolling here to get through this.
So a lot of that, like the Blue Note stuff and the Verve stuff, those old records.
Yeah.
After we did Kinda Blue and Sketches of Spain, I obviously played those for Don Was, who's the president of Blue Note, who had a office in the building. And when he heard that, he was like, can we do that to the old Blue Note stuff? And we were like, absolutely. So Don and I actually spent a day together and we got 5 old Blue Note records. And we actually used Studio B again and came up with the same kind of reamping situation.
Oh, cool.
That he liked and I liked. And he said, all right, that's the Blue Note sound.
And does that include the Louis Armstrong records?
Yeah.
Or is that different?
So a lot of the Blue Note, the Verve stuff.
Coltrane, Locomotion, Blue Train. Amazing.
Yeah. So for Blue Note, I use Studio B. For Verve, I used Studio A just to make them a little different. But that's the concept with those old records.
So that's awesome. So to say that back, you've got a 3-track source and you're creating that as a simple or minimalist, I should say, stereo version, but you're also feeding that to the other rooms so that the mics themselves can help recreate the spatial aspect.
Yes, exactly.
If we were making up our own version of that let's say we built our home Atmos studio and we were redoing our own, first band demo, you might send those original tracks straight to the front stereo, left and right, and maybe the center speakers, and then the mics that are out in your studio just go directly to these other speakers, and that's all that goes to them.
Basically,
it's kind of it.
I mean, yeah, and the one difference is it's not a plug and play thing either. I mean, we're going through every song and balancing, and so it's not like, oh, take this record and run it through there and then you're done. It's actually, and still to this day, it's actually something I do. I actually listen to the record and do a mix. So one song may have more of the reamp than others, depending on the style of music and what's already in it, and how much reverb is on the original and what it is and all that kind of stuff. So
what have you learned about smart ways to? I mean, obviously you've had this advanced reamping situation there at Capitol. Maybe you've done versions of that in other places. What have you learned about the process of reamping and things that we might want to think about if we ever just want to experiment with something like that?
Again, you have to listen. You have to. It's a song by song thing, just like mixing a record.
But I mean, is it challenging even to just say, well, what speakers are we going to send this out into the room with, and where are we going to put those speakers and things like that?
No, that was. I mean, I think I used a set of PMCs or ATCs, whatever. No, that part of it didn't. I mean, the only thing about that is, you have to make decisions like how loud is it in the room and stuff like that, because that will change tone and everything like that. So, but again, it's that mixing and walking in circles thing. You just kind of do it until it feels right. And then
just to clarify this, the thinking in this situation is you're feeding it into the studio space as if the band was in the studio performing. And an alternative with something like Capitol Chambers is this is a reverb effect that we're adding to a record.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a completely different thing. Yeah, totally different. The Chambers is a reverb plugin. Yeah, it's a representation of the actual chambers at Capitol,
that's great.
Which I still use all the time. It's on. There's at least 2 or 3 of them on every one of my mixes. That's for sure. It was kind of a selfish thing. I wanted the chambers at home, and that was the way to get it.
Yeah,
but it's been really successful.
We talked about that on the last one too, which was really cool to hear you talk about that whole story.
Yeah.
There's now you've had more chance to use them.
Exactly. And now, a couple of years ago, Universal Audio modeled the Capitol mastering compressor, which there were only 4 analog ones ever made. And they did a really great job with that. And once I got even the first beta version of it, or probably even before the beta version, I was like, wow, this is great. And that immediately went on my stereo bus.
So you've been sort of in the room with the modeling process going on for stuff. Is there anything you want to say about just for listeners in terms of like what goes into modeling something? I mean, like we hear about it, but most of us have no idea. We can't even picture what that process might look like in a studio.
Right.
Is it exciting? Is it everybody jumping up and down? Is it really boring and there's just like bouncing lights on a scope?
Yeah, it's the majority of the time it's more boring, but it is fun. Like with the chamber plugin, we spent 3 days down in the chambers at Capitol, and just for context, if people don't know what the chamber is, it's just a big concrete room. And at Capitol, we had 8 of them underneath the parking lot, and it's got 2 speakers at one end and 2 microphones at the other end. And we pump the signal down, and it bangs around in that chamber, and then the microphones return to the console, just like a reverb return, and that's your reverb. So at Capitol, nothing ever changed unless something broke. Nothing changed. The speakers didn't change. The microphones didn't change. You could EQ into it or EQ out of it, but if you didn't like the chamber, then you tried a different one. And if you didn't like that one, you tried a different one. And if you didn't like that one, so the only thing you could do was switch them. We didn't move, we didn't go down there and move stuff or anything like that. When we did the plugin, we wanted to obviously have some features. So in that instance, we chose 3 different sets of microphones, and then it's a process of setting the mics. And then, they had a team, UA had a team that came in, and they have these frequency sweeps that go from nothing to everything. And, you try to get a really clean sweep where there's no noises and no buildings creaking and stuff like that. And then they would take those, and then, they took them back and did whatever they did to them. And then when they thought they had something, they would send it to me, and I would listen, and me and a couple of the other guys, we would listen and compare it to the originals and be like, okay, this sounds not quite here, not quite there. We were just doing listening tests, basically. Yeah. And then having some input on the actual features, like EQ points and stuff like that. But the fun part was we actually found in the original blueprints for the chambers, Les Paul had designed the chambers originally.
Oh, wow.
And in the original blueprints, he had specified what mics and where they should actually go in the chambers. Wow. And because it's Capitol, we still had those old Altec microphones. They weren't in the chambers anymore. They were in the mic locker. But if you use the Altec mics in the plugin, it's those original Les Paul specifications with those original microphones. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's pretty wild. Look, if you're like me, then you love having cool instruments in your studio, right? No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments and sounds you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then adding awesome overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Use the code ROCK10 now to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples, all over at nativeinstruments.com. You know, if we were even creating, because I think it's a good reminder to us that we have this ability in our own studios. You know, sometimes we record something and we wish we had done a room mic, or we wish it had a better sound of space around it. And it's always possible for us to send our own recordings back out to our living room space or our studio space, play it through speaker and mic it up and create room mics. So it's cool to hear you remind us that, like, you know, choosing different mic options will create a different sound, and you can kind of mix and match and experiment, and the drummer won't get bored.
No. Well, eventually
have you found that? Have you found that these techniques can be more useful for like sonorous instruments than for percussive instruments? Are there is it a little challenging to recreate a room that way with drums, or is that still totally cool and doable?
It's definitely doable. If I get something to mix and like either I didn't get drum rooms, or it was recorded in a really small room, or I don't like them or whatever. A lot of times with that, I'll lean on the UA Oceanway plugin.
Yeah.
And just do their I think they call it a reamp in there too. But so I'll create rooms like that. Sometimes something like a chamber plugin and, crank it down to a small space.
Is that Oceanway?
Not the Bricasti, the Seventh Heaven is really good for that reverb, Liquid Sonics.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask that part of the question, or maybe just answer, maybe there's more to say. The recreation of really good rock drum room spaces. Isn't that Oceanway, wasn't one of those rooms really known for the wooden sound for rock drums?
Yeah. Studio B at Oceanway.
Studio B was okay. That's
killer for that. I mean, both rooms are great, but Studio B is kind of the rock and roll room.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, let's see. So now you're doing a lot of Atmos, right? Tell us about the studio you're joining us from right now, the space.
So this is it's my house and my mixing room. So a couple things happened a few years ago. One, we had COVID lockdown and everything closed, and I needed to keep working. And when we closed Capitol for COVID, I just kind of grabbed all the equipment I thought I might be able to use, having no idea how long we were going to be gone. Came home and, literally found out, like, one day I was at the studio, came home, and by the time I got home that night, everything's closing. And they kind of told us, well, it's probably going to be at least a month or two, at least, having no idea. And talking to my wife, and it was like, well, I always had a little studio at the house, just it was a little office-y area. I could do mixing. I could just, Pro Tools and whatnot, no analog gear, anything like that. Just a set of speakers, a controller, and my laptop, basically. I think I had some control surfaces, but we said, well, look, I got to keep working. And I was doing all this Atmos work, and we had a lot of Atmos work to do. And I thought, well, I bet you with the kind of mismatch of speakers I have here, I can come up with a suitable Atmos room and at least get some work done. So it was actually my wife's idea. We actually flip-flopped my little office space and the living room. So we took all the living room furniture and put it in a little office space, and I took over the living room because I needed space for all these speakers. So I ended up with a 7-1 system of mismatched speakers. And, luckily I had the advantage of Capitol and Dolby. And so when I needed software and stuff like that, people were like, yeah, here, keep going. And the studio was very happy that I was working.
Yeah.
Because I was still, now the catch was, this was a makeshift place, obviously no tuning, anything like that. So I didn't want anything to be released until I could hear it in a really good studio. About a month into it, when we realized that it wasn't ending anytime soon, I actually had a real Atmos studio available to me. It wasn't one of the Capitol rooms, but It was actually a PMC room that I had a key to that nobody was in because the studio was basically closed. So I could do like a bunch of mixes and then go there one day and play back and tweak, and then I could deliver them back and say, yeah, these are good to go. So I just kept doing that. And then when the studios reopened, well, I had this room kind of more dialed in by then. And I just kind of kept working at home because I didn't want to drive into work every day. And it allowed the other guys to use the rooms that were there. And then we had the unfortunate event of we had to close Capitol for earthquake renovations. So as we sit here now, the studios have been closed for a little over a year.
Wow.
And when we found out that was going to happen, it was like, well, I still have the studio here. And luckily my kids have all grown up and moved out, and we have a lot of other living space. So I just kind of took over the living room, and now it's more dialed in. So
now
it's not mismatched speakers and stuff anymore.
If you're going to set up your studio in the living room, does it sound better if you leave the plastic on the couch or take the plastic off?
You definitely have to take the plastic off. Yeah. Actually, there's no couch anymore. I had a piano in here at one point. It was just in the way.
I've been watching old Sopranos episodes.
Nice. And I think plus you get that squishy sound, when you sit down. Yeah. No, I was lucky. I have a decent sized living room, and I have a big opening to a hallway behind me, so all the bottom end runs out. So even when the Dolby guys came over to actually tune the room, they were like, "Wow, it's actually not too bad in here." So I didn't really have to do much like acoustic treatment and stuff. But there's days when if it's warm, I'll just open all the windows, and my neighbors can listen to me mixing Christmas records in June.
Nice. Yeah, I have a door right into the control room that goes out to my little driveway area there, and it's nice to just open it up when the weather's nice.
Exactly.
Low end.
I live in California. The weather's always nice here.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of bass and stuff, one of the records in your Atmos playlist is John Batiste, and that, and I mean, you got a bunch of records where the low end and the kick really stands out, but that was one. A Jenny Lewis record too, really punchy sounding, great mixes. Do you want to talk a little bit about, just educating us on how to think about mixing low end and kick and bass and drums in a world of Atmos?
Yeah, I mean, those two records you reference, they were great records, and a lot of credit has to be given to the guys who mixed the stereo. Because I just got stems of them. So I think Greg Kohler did the Jenny Lewis. I don't remember who did the Batiste record. So at that point, I'm not too worried about EQ and compression and stuff like that because it's already baked into the stem. The great part about Atmos is you've got a subwoofer, an LFE channel. It's a great thing, and it can be a problem too. You want to make sure you don't get in trouble with that. So I use the subwoofer, the LFE channel, as just kind of an extension of my main speakers. So I'll even lean over all the time and mute it and check and make sure that the bottom end doesn't go away. If you mute your subwoofer and your bass and your kick go away, you probably missed the point there.
Okay.
Depending on the size of your speakers and if you have bass management and stuff like that, it's a little bit different. I have pretty decent size left, center, right speakers, so I have plenty of bottom end in those. So if I mix without my subwoofer, so if you have smaller speakers and a subwoofer, you might, the subwoofer will be doing some of the bottom end work for your main left, right speakers because the speakers don't go down that low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In that situation, the subwoofer is part of your left and right setup or left, center, right setup, however you have it working. But you have in Atmos or in 5.1 or 7.1, you have a discrete LFE channel. So you can send discretely to those subwoofer channels. And so like in my system, my subwoofer is completely free from the front, left, and right. So anything I send to the LFE channel goes directly to the subwoofer. If I don't send anything there, nothing goes there. So I'm making sure that...
Would it be possible to have a studio where you have subs that accompany the left-right speakers and an LFE sub that's dedicated?
Sure.
Or do they blend into the
No,
sub?
you could absolutely do that. If you have LFEs as part of your left and right or left, right, center setup, you can just add an LFE channel to that. Absolutely. You want to make sure they're tuned properly at that point.
Right.
But that's basically what it is. And then I'm trying, not to screw it up again. That's most of most of it. But yeah, I'm always listening. A lot of it comes down to your listening environment too. If you're not in a room where you trust the bottom end, and usually bottom end is the thing that gives people a hard time, especially in project studios or home studios or, studios that weren't designed by, studio designers and stuff like that. The low end is where you have the biggest problem. So I think the most important thing you can do is get the low end in your room so that what you're hearing is real.
Yeah.
And obviously the best way to do that is to treat the room so that the room is working right. And then, tune your speakers to the room so that, if you're sitting in the middle of your room and there's a big, huge dip at 80 cycles, you're probably not going to work out too well for kick drums and stuff like that.
I guess that's a common thing too for near field monitors because if I remember correctly, the sound, well, this is different from a sub, but the sound bouncing from the speaker down to the floor and back up to your ears can create like that 70 hertz dip or something.
It can create all, coming off of back walls and front walls and square rooms, stuff like that. So, the low end is usually the part of most studios that gets in the way, and is the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing to deal with too, because those are big waveforms and they're tough. But that's the most important tool any of us engineers, mixers have is our listening environment. And I say environment, not just speakers. I mean, you have to have good speakers that you like, but you can put the best set of speakers into a room that doesn't sound good, and your speaker, it doesn't matter. The room is not good. So you really need to look at the room first, and then you can put any set of speakers in there, and at least you're hearing the speakers at that point. You're not hearing the weird things in the room.
For somebody walking into a room to think about this, maybe the first thing to pay attention to is just how echoey it is in the space, how reverberant,
Sure. Absolutely.
Do you hear your own voice bouncing off walls? If you clap your hands, do you hear that slap back? Those kind of questions.
Exactly. But you also don't want a completely dead room either. I remember at one point a while ago, there was this old studio at Capitol upstairs in one of the rooms, and we had taken it over for a minute. And I went up there to mix something because it was available. And it was a really dead room, and I knew it was dead, but I didn't realize how dead it was. And I did a mix there, and then I took it downstairs to Studio C to listen to it in a room I knew, and it was so bright, and there was nobody. It was like, and I grabbed the guy who was the chief maintenance at the time, and I was like, "What is going on here?" Listen, brought him up, brought him down, and he was like, "It's just," we realized the room was just absorbing all the high end.
Yeah.
So I wasn't hearing anything. So to get around it, we went around the building and found all the dry erase boards and FedEx boxes we could, and literally like taped them to the walls to get a little bit of reflection back. I mean, just to get me through that record. I ended up not working up there anymore. But.
Well, and it's funny because I feel like on the one hand, you learn that speakers are not supposed to be the same as instruments, in that like the speaker box, you don't want to have a reverberant sound inside it necessarily, or that sort of thing. But on the other hand, they are instruments. But like if you play an acoustic guitar and you take it around different parts of a house and strum it, you pick up on that pretty quickly. You're like, oh wow, it sounds better over here. It doesn't sound as good over here. If you had a super dead, I've got a dead room in my studio, and if I play the acoustic in there, I'm like, I don't think I like my acoustic as much as I thought I did,
Right.
It's just so dead. And it can sound really cool for drums and things where you want it to be kind of hyper dead and compressed. But it's just a good reminder that our speakers, like instruments, they kind of do need to speak in the room with the right balance.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're referring to,
Yeah, just like you said, just like instruments in a room, like a vocal in a dead room is just, there's no life to it. It's really difficult to get that to sound good. We would do vocals like a Capitol. Those were big rooms, really big rooms. And if we did a vocal, obviously we put baffles behind the singer, stuff like that. But you still just had that, even though you weren't hearing room sound, so to speak, there was air around it. And it was, and the singer felt really comfortable because they weren't getting this dry signal right back in their face either. you know, so yeah, even something close mic'd in a good sounding room is still going to sound better. Yeah.
That brings up a question that I wrote down about one of the records you did, Melody Gardot, if I'm pronouncing that right. Beautiful, beautiful vocals and warm strings and stuff like that. But that vocal particularly, the first thing that struck me as I was like, holy shit, there's deep, deep lows in that voice that make an appearance when in just the right moments. And I wondered if you had thoughts about that and you know, just what does it mean to mix vocals or record vocals and retain low end? I mean, we live in a world of people saying a lot of times, oh, just roll off the lows, you know, high pass everything, which is not necessarily what you want to do.
Right. So you just said it, the key. It's the low end in that voice. I mean, it starts with the singer. It's, you know, if you look at a Melody Gardot or a Diana Krall, they have a nice, rich tone to their voice, just, you know, without a microphone. Obviously, for Melody, we used a really great mic. I think we were using a 251 at Capitol or Henson, whichever room we were in. And, you know, she gets right up on the mic and, you know, not too close, but, you know, she's an inch away, inch and a half away. And then it's her. You know, good mic preamps, it's usually a Neve preamp. It's usually either a Summit or a Fairchild compressor. So, you know, we have really, you know, we're lucky we have really good gear, which helps, and really good rooms. But, you know, it really comes down to the singer. You know, Al and I used to joke a lot because people would say, you know, like, how did you guys get that great, you know, Al, how do you get that great Diana Krall vocal sound? It was like, oh, it's really easy. You take any microphone and put it right in front of her face. And that's what she sounds like. So at that point, we're just trying to capture what's already there. Yeah. You know, there's some voices that aren't like that. And, you know, they don't have that rich bottom end. But in that case, you know, you use a different mic maybe that's a little more flattering to that kind of a voice. It's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just a different kind of voice. But yeah, we don't use a lot of, like, I don't think I ever saw Al use a filter on anything, unless we got something that was like broken.
What about
or
pop
a live
filter?
Pop filter? Definitely. Yeah, definitely had a pop filter. Any
particular, like any pop filters that never use that or definitely use this?
Well, I like the old cloth ones. Personally.
Did you guys stretch pantyhose over a coat hanger like we did for our first records?
When I first started back in the day, we had the hoops, but we would definitely, to fix them, we would definitely go get pantyhose and stretch it over there. Yeah. But like, you know, the metal ones and stuff, they work. I don't like them as much. I just like the old cloth ones. But you definitely have to have something there. It's a very rare instance where you can't use it. We ran into some things like there's a video that we did with Paul McCartney and his band called Kisses on the Bottom. And in the video, you see Paul singing into a 47, and there was big discussions about the pop filter because Al wanted it and the director didn't want it. And, you know, because it was ugly, basically. And we kind of went back and forth. Everybody went back and forth. And Paul finally said, like, no, let's try it without it. I know what the problem is. I'll take care of it. So if you look closely, you can see him, you know, he's really good at it. He'll just turn his head a little bit when he's, you know, so he doesn't pop peas and stuff like that. So
yeah.
Because cool. That was a live broadcast too. It was literally live streamed to the world. So it wasn't like I could go back and fix them, you know.
Blow up a lot of TV speakers if you got that one wrong. Huh?
Exactly. But it helps, again, to have a really great singer.
The S-Series by Atom Audio, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors, blending advanced engineering and in-house design. With 5 models in various sizes and configurations, these monitors build on Atom Audio's iconic heritage while incorporating new technology for improved acoustic performance. The range includes the compact S2V with the 7-inch woofer, the 3-way S3H with twin 7-inch woofers, the vertical S3V with a single 9-inch woofer, and the powerful S5H and S5V main monitors featuring a 12-inch woofer and exceeding 131 dBSPL per pair. Despite differences in size and power, all these models provide highly analytical sound for professional audio applications. The S-Series includes new woofers, mid-range drivers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine for crossover optimization. The result is accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail in bass and mid-frequencies with wider frequency ranges, and forward-looking digital connectivity, all in a durable design. The S-Series ensures longevity in your studio, backed with a 5-year guarantee at atomaudio.com. I am massively impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The mastering assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need for a professional result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters for approval and get comments back like, "Holy bleep, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, you're a wizard, finally I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge," well then I know I'm doing something right. So check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great apps at iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the second half of the show, aka the Jam Session. My guest today is Steve Genewick, joining us here from his studio in Los Angeles. You're in Los Angeles, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You ready to jam?
I'm ready to jam.
All right. We did not bring it up yet, but topics like working with minimal tracks, isolating sound and recreating spaces brings to mind a particular project that recently just came out that you got to work on doing string arrangements or doing string recordings, I guess. You have some stories to share with us, hopefully about the new Beatles Now and Then song, the last Beatles song.
My new favorite credit.
Yeah, right on, man. Tell us about that. That sounds like an amazing experience.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And it's kind of ironic because when we booked this interview, I didn't even know when the song was coming out. I had no idea. I found out, I guess, when we're recording this, it came out, I think, 2 days ago, or 1 day ago. Maybe it was yesterday. Actually, I think it came out yesterday. But I found out it was being released like last week. So obviously we did it like a year and a half ago. So it was fun. Yeah. I mean, I had worked with Paul before and I had worked with Giles before. And I, got a call from Paula Salvatore, the studio manager at Capitol. She said, "Hey, Giles and Paul just booked a string date that they want you to engineer. It's going to be on this day." And it was a few weeks away. And I was, "Oh, okay, that's great." Always exciting to work with those guys, no matter how many times you work with a Beatle, it's still exciting. I don't care who the hell you are. That doesn't get old. So it was fun, but it was booked as a Paul McCartney session. We had no idea what we were doing. I talked to Giles like, "Hey, what are we? Oh, it's just a string session. I'll bring a thing. It's something Paul's working on."
They're keeping it under wraps, huh?
That's really great. Under wraps. So what happened was, Giles, this was a Saturday we were going to start, and we had a Saturday booked, and then the actual string date was Sunday, and it was one of the last sessions at Capitol before the building was going to be shut down. So the building was pretty empty, which was nice. But I talked to Giles and he said, look, I got a thing in the morning on Saturday morning. I'm going to drop the drive off the night before and you guys can come in and start getting set up. Here's the session. It'll be pretty obvious. But that's what we're going to do. So, okay, no problem. So, we showed up at noon or whatever it was. And Chandler Herod, who was another one of the Capitol engineers, who was going to be my Pro Tools operator on the session, he got there before I did and had the drive. So when I walked in the room, he was the only one there. And I walked in and he just had a look on his face that I knew. I was like, what? Like, what is wrong? Like, this is not good. And he said, do you know what we're working on? And I was like, no, something for Paul. Why? And he went, listen. And he hit play. And it was definitely not Paul's voice coming out of the speakers. It was definitely John Lennon singing.
Amazing.
And I went, okay. And he went, listen to these guitars. And he soloed these guitars. I was like, wow, that sounds very much like the Beatles. And it was very obvious very quickly that we were working on a Beatles track. And when Giles showed up, we were like, Giles, you want to tell us what's going on here? And he was like, yeah, there was one song and, we've been working on it for a while. And it was, pretty much unusable when they did the other two songs in 95. But now with this new technology that Peter Jackson, the film director, has in New Zealand, Paul thought it might be interesting to take another look at this one. So, so that's where it was. And then we had, they had Paul and Giles and Ben Foster had written a string arrangement. So, set up to do the strings. The first day was really fun because it was kind of them just going over the mocked up string arrangement for the song. But also they were in the process of finishing the remixes for Revolver. Not the Atmos mixes, but the stereo mixes. So part of that first day was Paul hearing the most recent Revolver mixes. And it was really fun to sit in the control room with Paul and listening to Revolver and listening to him give mixed comments and stuff like that. It was like, wow, okay, this is kind of surreal. And then the next day we had the string session and, everybody was there. The funny part was we couldn't tell the string players what we were doing. As far as everybody knew, unless you were in the control room, and there were only like 4 or 5 of us in the control room. We all had to sign NDAs and all that kind of stuff. But unless you were there, it was just listed as a Paul McCartney song. And like the string players and people out in the room, they just heard the click and the rhythm section.
No.
We didn't play them any vocals.
That's hilarious. So they didn't
and
even
just
know
really basic. No, really basic. Like they got like drums, bass, piano, maybe a little guitar. And, obviously it was a big deal because Paul was there. He was out when they started walking in, he was already there and he's such a friendly guy. So he was out in the room talking to them and joking and, and then when we started to actually record, I think the first 2 passes we did, he never came in the control room. He was out in the room with the players. So, we did a couple passes and at some point, either me or Giles or somebody was like, Paul, you should really come in and listen to this and make sure it sounds the way you want it to sound before we get too far into this, if we want to change something. And it was really sweet because it was the first time I had seen Paul since Al Schmitt had passed away.
Yeah.
And, we came in and the 2 of us were standing at the console and, we hit play and the strings started playing and he just leaned over to me very quietly and said, you've been paying attention.
That's great.
Which was nice. He loved it. Yeah. So again, it was just a string session. It was really fun. We knew what we were working on, so we were psyched about it. I thought the string arrangement was great, came out great. I did a quick little stem mix of it. And, at the end of the day, it was hugs and thank yous. And then everybody left. And so then we couldn't talk about it for a year and a half.
Wow. You can't tell your kids, can't tell your wife.
Yeah, I think my wife knew.
Break it down a little bit for the rock stars in case this is still new to them. What was so special about this particular track? It went through some pretty remarkable transformations too to allow this to even happen.
Right.
And there's some great videos where Paul and kind of describes, and maybe Ringo's talking about it too, just describes the process of finishing the song that they had started decades ago, I think.
Right. So the way I understand it was, and a lot of it is me watching the same videos as you guys, and then talking, when we were doing it, talking to Paul and Giles. So from what I understand, there was cassette that had the John Lennon demos. These demos he had done at his apartment in New York, just him singing and playing piano onto a cassette. And that cassette had been given to the 3 surviving Beatles at the time, in I think it was 94 or 95, when they were doing the anthology stuff. And they took those cassettes and cleaned them up as best they could at the time. And the 3 Beatles overdubbed them, and it became, what was it? Free as a Bird and Real Love, I think, were the 2 that came out in 95. Yeah. And from what I understand, the Now and Then song, they had started working on it and at some point had abandoned it because there was just the balance between the piano and the vocal wasn't great, and they couldn't get the vocal to come out to a point where
it was all pre-mixed. It was just
because it was just cassette. It was just John singing and playing. It was probably one microphone, Yeah. It was probably like a boombox or something like that, to be honest with you. So they kind of abandoned that one, and it just went away because they were never going to get it to a quality place where they thought it was releasable. So it just sat on the shelf. And then Peter Jackson did the Get Back film that's out now, which is really incredible. And I have to go back. It's about time for me to go back and watch it again. But when they did that film, and for some of the other films that Peter Jackson had done, he and his team had come up with a way to separate audio. It's machine learning. There was a whole stink when Paul mentioned AI. It's not really AI. It's just machine learning. It's people going through a process and doing it. And they had used this process for some of the remixes that Giles had done also for Revolver and some of the other ones. So it's, from what I understand, it takes time and it's very not cheap. And it's a bit of a thing. It's not Isotope. It's not running it through one of those, demix plugins or something. This is actually a person doing painstakingly going through this. So when Peter Jackson had done it successfully for Get Back and done it successfully for Revolver and some of the remix stuff, Paul thought, well, we have this other song. And I guess he talked to Ringo and Yoko and Olivia Harrison and said, why don't we see if we can resurrect this? And because they had worked on it in 95, they had George's guitar parts still. So, Peter Jackson was able to extract the vocal and the vocal.
Because they had already started the overdub process, but just decided they couldn't really mix it properly because John's voice was just buried in the piano, and I think there was even noise on the original cassette, buzzing and stuff like that.
I'm sure it was noisy as all hell, yeah.
But in the video, it's remarkable because they show the post-transformation and they play John's voice, and you're just like, it's just all you hear is the voice. You don't hear any piano bleeding through or anything.
It's pretty frightening. Like I said, that day when they were listening to the Revolver mixes, we had the session. I got to sit and solo stuff. And it's remarkable. Like when you soloed the bass, it was just the bass. When you soloed a voice, it was just the voice. It was, I don't know how they do it, but it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But I think at this point, you kind of have to have a Beatle budget to do it.
A Beatle budget. Nice. So well, you probably had to have a Beatle budget to book at Abbey Road for 6 months back in the day too.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they have.
That's
them.
Amazing. So
Thank
then
God.
you guys did the strings for it.
Yes.
What can you tell us about an appropriate way to record strings for a song like that?
Yeah, it's funny because I saw another video this morning, the music video. There's quite a lot of footage from the video. So you can see exactly what I did. It was not a huge string section. I think it was like 12, 3, and 2, something like that. 12 violins and 3 violas, a couple cellos, and a bass. It's, the thing about doing any orchestral session, and I do quite a few of them, it's all about the setup, the preparation and the setup. We arranged the strings like a small string section would want to be arranged. The kind of violins are kind of towards the left, and the violas towards the center, and the cellos towards the right. I was working at Capitol, so I had the Capitol mic locker, which was great. I'm sure I used all U67s on everything, and probably either M50s or M149s as the room mic. Probably a 47 on the upright bass. There would be no EQ or anything like that. It's really just balance. It's using really good microphones, setting the players up so they're comfortable and they can hear each other and they can see each other. And then it's balance and, try to stay out of the way. I was lucky enough to learn from guys like Al Schmitt and Jeff Emmerich and those kind of engineers. So,
and we did cover a lot of that on the last one too, but if you were to just do a summary of it, where might these mics go with that 12-piece orchestra? And
sure.
And if I recall, one of the things Al taught you and that you shared with us was this concept of keeping them in omni because it makes it easier to make balance adjustments. And was that true for something like this?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I would be pretty sure that I had all the mics in omni. Maybe not the bass mics, but for sure the violins and violas. So the violin, so we'll start with the room mics, were probably, to the left and right of the conductor, and they were probably 10 to 12 feet in the air. This was a smaller section, so they were probably a little lower, probably more like 10 feet, and maybe 6 feet apart. I don't believe I used, it wasn't a decatry, it wasn't a left, center, right for this because it was such a small section. There was no need for that.
Yeah.
I would have probably used 4 67s on the violins, maybe 3, depending on how many there were. Those would have been an omni, and they would have been maybe 8 feet in the air. Usually it was funny because one time with Al, I realized that if I stood flat foot on the floor, I could put my arm above my head and touch the microphone. So that's kind of how high the mics go.
Right on.
So whatever that is, 8 feet, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Violas the same. I probably used one mic on the violas for the 3 violas, and those mics would have been an Omni 67s. The cello mics, I don't go from underneath. They're usually kind of up above the music stand, facing down towards. So one
for
mic
these
for
Omni
2 cellos
mics that are above, they would be sort of horizontal. So they're sort of, even though they're Omni, they're facing down towards
basically facing the floor, facing the instruments. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about the Omni mics is, at this point, everything works as a team. Everybody's a group. You're all in the same room. You're going to have leakage. You don't have isolation between, one violin and another violin or anything like that. So by putting the mics in Omni, you're creating really usable, good sounding leakage.
Right.
There's no weird frequency things because it's trying to roll off, the back of the mic and stuff like that. So, you make the leakage work for you. And then, the bass would have just been a 47, probably not in Omni. That would have been in cardioid, just so I could get some definition on the acoustic bass.
Okay. Not for the low, low boost, not for the proximity effect necessarily.
No, because it probably was back a good 3-4 feet, 3 feet probably from the instrument.
Yeah.
You don't have to get real close with these guys. And then obviously you had some of the best players in the world.
Yeah.
Which always, which they have great sounding instruments. So which helps. And if it's the room is set up right and they can hear properly, they really balance themselves in the room. So you can almost put the mic preamps all at the same level and the orchestra will balance itself. I mean, there's a little push and pull here and there.
So I have to ask this question. In your experience, then, you have carefully placed a $25,000 1950s microphone on a very expensive stand in the air above an instrument that is from the 1700s, worth $100,000 at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
That can make you nervous. That's the definition of being nervous on a session.
Yeah, on a mic stand that's probably 60 years old, because the old Starbird stands are still the best.
Amazing. That's amazing.
You have to trust it.
I have had some sessions here. A cellist brought in a 1700s cello, and I was just like, I was trying to put my coals up on my mic stand was not a right? An Ancient Starbird. This is like, the Musician's Friend special or something like
Right.
that. So
Yeah.
makes you nervous. You're like, oh, please don't fall over today.
Yeah. There's a couple times where, a stand would be janky and it'd be like, yeah, we're not using this stand. This one has to go to the shop and be fixed. So yeah, it can be daunting at times,
Well, that's pretty cool. So then the way you blend the strings together, how crucial is the sound of a console that's blending these string mics together? Does tape need to be involved? Are there some other aspects that really give it the sound that you put the stamp of approval on?
Definitely the preamps count. Like I said, I probably would have used Neve preamps. I'm guessing for that, like the Beatles thing, I probably used the 1081s, the outboard preamps we had. We were recording on an 88R console, which has great sounding preamps. It's not unusual for me to use those preamps, but I believe for the Beatles thing, I did use the old 1081s, and they were just flat, no EQ. And then I would return those to the console so that I had faders, so I could do a blend with the faders and then send that to the Pro Tools. In this case, I quit using tape a long time ago, unless it's specifically requested. And in this case, tape probably would have hurt because it just would have added noise.
Yeah.
We were recording at 96K, through really good converters. So.
And then you send it to Peter and you say, hey, Mr. Jackson, would you take the noise out of this?
Take the noise out of this. Yeah.
Just did, please?
Take all this noise I just added for no reason. Can you take it out? Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. No need for tape. And then I don't know what happened in the mix. I kind of wonder if, I think Spike Stent was the mixer.
Mm-hmm.
He may have just used the 2-track, print that I don't know what he did. You'd have to ask him.
Yeah.
But I know it's not unusual for mixers to just use the 2-track mix that I gave him. And I probably used a little bit of the Capitol Chamber on it.
I'll take you up on that. I'll have to ask him.
There you go.
Send out another. Mr. Stent, please come be on the podcast. All right. So then what else would you like to say about, we already talked a little bit about this, doing room mics for the Atmos remixes, but what about this concept of recording for Atmos? And do you have any thoughts on that? I guess, were you even thinking about Atmos for this Beatles stuff, or was that just like not a topic? And if you are thinking about Atmos on a session, what are some choices you might recommend to us to experiment with as far as additional mics?
Right. So on the Beatles thing, I don't think I hung any extra microphones. I may have hung an extra set of room mics now that I think about it, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Because part of the reason I became friends with Giles was because working on a lot of Atmos stuff. So
yeah.
But a lot of times, usually for me, recording stuff for Atmos, it depends on what it is. But a lot of times it's just maybe adding a couple extra mics, a couple extra room mics on a drum kit or something like that. I have done a couple of things where I knew it was going to be in Atmos. Like the first time I did it, when I had started mixing Atmos, I had a recording session coming up, a big band record that I was engineering. Just for stereo. This had nothing to do with Atmos, but I thought, it was a friend of mine, and I thought, well, this is a good chance. Maybe I should experiment with like recording for Atmos and putting up extra mics and stuff. So I did my normal big band setup, and then I hung up an extra 8 or 10 mics. I hung like a stereo mic way up in the ceiling, and I had ambient mics kind of around the band, and I had wide room mics and stuff like that. And then we just proceeded to record. Now I was monitoring in stereo because I wasn't in the Atmos room. I was just, we were just making a stereo record. And after the first song or the first take, when we were listening, I thought I wasn't listening to those other mics. And I thought, well, I should push these up and let's listen to these real quick just to make sure they're not distorted and that everything's working and all that. Yeah. And I pushed them all up and realized that I had a great recording of the ceiling of Capitol. It was just all ambience. And I was like, there's no way that's going to work. Like a little bit of ambience is one thing. So I took most of the microphones and actually dropped them down to basically like head level. And that worked much better. When I got to the Atmos mix, I was able to spread them around. So I think a lot of times when people think of Atmos and surround sound or whatever you want to call it, they think of ambience. And it's not always big ambience that you need, because too much big ambience, it's just wet and bangy, and
Right.
it's just there's no presence.
It's like you're too far away from the show.
Exactly. So yeah, you don't want to be in the back of the auditorium. You want to be in the front. So sometimes, depending, like I said, if I'm doing a string section, I may hang a couple extra mics here and there. If I'm doing a drum overdub, I might hang, another set of room mics behind the drummer, or something way up high, and see if that works later. It's not, if you can absolutely make a very compelling Atmos mix with a quote unquote standard recording setup.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I think where it gets fun, and like I've been involved in a couple records where the artist and the composers knew going in that it was going to be an Atmos record, so they wrote parts with that in mind. So where we would have extra synth parts or extra guitar parts, where we knew, you would probably never do that in stereo because it would be too much. But we know this is going to be an Atmos, and we know that those can go on the back, and that these guitars can go on the sides, and they'll work with those guitars that are in the front, stuff like that. That's where it gets really interesting, is when the artists get in on it from the start. And hopefully we'll start seeing some more of that.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music we are creating to the style that we want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments' complete bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and then adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's a great way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. Yeah, I think that is very exciting. And I can't remember if it was one of the things you were talking about. So we should give a shout out to you and to Matt and all of you who at the last NAMM we were all at. This will come out a little after NAMM, but previously you guys did a great Atmos mixing panel. And that was a lot of fun to just hear you guys talk about this stuff. But the concept of moving things to these other speakers, and that it actually, I guess one of the things suggested was that it can allow you to undo some of the carving EQ, some of the removal of tones and frequencies. It's like you can kind of leave it alone a little more. Is that true? Is that an accurate thing to say?
Absolutely.
And do you experience that?
All the time. Yeah. Situations where, if it's a kind of a thick rock track, so to speak, and you got a couple electric guitars, couple acoustic guitars, drum kit, piano, whatever, in stereo you have to make room for that stuff. So you might be thinning out acoustic guitars, to get them to fit with the thicker electric guitars. Well, in Atmos, you don't necessarily have to do that. You can just kind of pull the acoustic guitars a little into the room, into the side speakers, and you can keep them more full range. You don't have to. You're not carving to make space. You have all this space because you have all this space around you and above you. So you can just move stuff around until it feels right, and not necessarily go after EQs and stuff like that. You don't have to, heavily compress stuff to get it to come out of these two little speakers and make everything fit. You can have dynamics and all that kind of stuff because you have all this space. And there's space inherent in the system just because those two speakers are farther apart, the front speaker and the back speaker. So, just by nature and physics, you have more space. But then sonically, you have that space also because they're not in the same place.
Have you started to notice other aspects that free up in the creative sphere? So in other words, can tuning be less of an issue between two instruments? Or have you noticed that parts that would not necessarily work in the arrangement, they kind of work when they're in a different location?
That I have noticed. Tuning and stuff like that, I haven't really, out of tune is out of tune. It depends on how sensitive you are to that, I guess. What I have noticed is, like we talked about before, when you pull two things apart that were never intended to be pulled apart, then you might notice stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely, again, you have more space. So even in the 5-1 days, back in the day, I was Elliot Shiner's assistant when he remixed Queen, A Night at the Opera, for 5.1. And Brian May was with us when we mixed that record. And I can't remember which song we were doing, but there was one song and Brian was like, there's another guitar part, it's doubled. There's another guitar part, it's doubled. And we were like, Brian, we've been through this with a fine tooth comb. We're using all the guitars that were on this record. And he went, no. It's not on the record. But I remember playing them, but it was too much and we took them out. But I remember playing them. They're probably there. And we poked around a little bit and found these two guitar parts. And he was like, yeah, they just didn't fit in this thick. He goes, put them in the back or whatever it was. So, I mean, we never would have done that ever on a chord, but since he said it. So again, that's an instance where in the 5-1 mix, there's a guitar part doubled that was never on the original song.
Yeah, that's
but now we had room to do it, Other times it can be hard. Like I did some test mixes for the Rolling Stones to play for them to get them on board. And they gave me 2 songs from the Goat's Head Soup album. And those were the 2 hardest songs I've ever had to mix because, it's a fine line with a band like that. When you start separating parts, that's not how a band that works.
You're breaking up the band, man.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're supposed to be kind of mushed together in the middle. That's the way that it was played and that's the way it was intended and that's the way it worked. And as soon as you started splitting them up too much, the groove wasn't right. I mean, it was still the Rolling Stones. The parts were great, but the groove was different. It just grooved a lot different. So it was really difficult to try to spread out an Atmos mix, but not lose the groove,
Yeah.
So it took me a long time to do those mixes.
Yeah, I'll bet. And it really does bring home that point of, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's what makes a band interesting as a band and band recordings. And, my own discoveries of those things were like doing something with my band and the bass was on top. And then I was, early Pro Tools. I was like, well, I can straighten it out. So I'm going to straighten out the timing of the bass. And I did it. And it's like all the excitement and fun was lost. And I was like, oh, I guess for us, having the bass be on top of the note is what makes us us,
Right. He did play it right.
He did play it right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, we've had, plenty of records where, we tuned some vocals and it was like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. Just put it back. That's 2 in tune. Put it back the way. Not that it was out of tune before, but it was 2 in tune. It didn't sound natural. So, you have to be open to those kind of things, especially when you're dealing with like bands and people playing together and stuff like that. That, you don't necessarily want mistakes, but sometimes, forcing perfection can be a problem.
Yeah.
Like, why hire a drummer like Vinnie Colaiuta and then put him on a grid? That makes no sense. Let him be him,
Yeah.
So now if everybody missed the downbeat, that's different.
Yeah.
Then you line up the downbeat. So I'm not opposed to using the technology. I use it all the time, but you have to know when it's appropriate and when it's not,
I think for me, discovering the vocal tuning issue was realizing that there's a human element of emotion in a song when you hear somebody trying to get to a note and maybe reaching it at a certain moment in the note or maybe overshooting it slightly. And if you tune it and it's too perfect, it actually makes it sound effortless.
Right.
And so it takes out the human effort that made it interesting in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then if you really want to be cool, you just go all the way, just max the tuner out and go robot.
The other thing to remember about especially tuning, like vocal tuning, is if you listen to the like older records, if the Sinatras and stuff like that, those were all played by people and instruments. And even though they're in tune, that pitch center wasn't a machine doing it. So now, if you play a digital piano, it's in tune. It's perfectly in tune. Or if you play, if you have a synth patch, it's perfectly in tune. If you have, music that's being generated by computers, they're perfectly in tune. And then you put a voice on top of that is never really perfect. It's not, a person isn't a machine. Well, now it can sound more out of tune because the rest of the song is so in tune, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It becomes more apparent. Whereas if you're dealing with, an orchestra or a big band or, even a rock band with guitars that are, no guitar is ever really in tune,
Right.
That pitch center is a little wider so that now the singer has a little more space to let their pitch center be a little wider. So it feels different.
Yeah. Well, equal tempered tuning is just everything equally out of tune.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes if it doesn't bother you, just leave it.
Yeah.
I don't like people who tune just like, well, just put everything on the note. It's like, well, but is it wrong or do you just want everything on the note? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think the vocal tuning thing is it's an experiment. I mean, it's a production decision in the same way that trying an effect on a guitar is. It's like, well, try it out. And do you like it better or do you like it worse?
Right. And it's become an effect, kind of.
Yeah.
It's become a sound, especially in a lot of modern pop things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get down on it because of that. Like, oh, I hear the tuning. It's like, well, you're supposed to hear the tuning. That's what they wanted you to, they wanted you to hear that sound.
Yeah.
I can point to a billion records that you don't hear the tuning,
It's funny. I'm looking on my question sheet and then John Coltrane pops up for those records we already talked about. But it occurs to me, I don't know if I've heard anybody do like hyper auto-tuned jazz albums yet.
No, hopefully not. I don't think so. Probably not me. But hey, somebody wants to do it, let's do it.
Yeah, let's find out what it sounded like. Speaking of tuning, speaking of vocals, Cynthia Erivo. Not that sounds like tuning, but that was one where I made a comment just about the background vocals sounding so great, and it made me want to ask you about things you discovered about BVs and vocals in Atmos mixing. And does that are there certain instruments like that seem to really be able to take advantage of the many speakers more than other instruments?
Certainly, and especially that record. That's one of my favorite Atmos albums, that Cynthia Erivo record. And again, I didn't record it. I just mixed it in Atmos. So I got really good stems from them, really extensive. And even I told her, I was like, you made the perfect Atmos record and you had no idea you were doing it. There was just so much ear candy in there. I mean, all those background parts are her. She sang them all. For those that don't know Cynthia Erivo, you should go look her up. She's mostly known as an actress. I believe she's going to be in the new the movie they're doing with is it Wicked? One of those.
Oh, Wicked the musical?
Yeah, her and Ariana Grande. I think it's Wicked they're doing it.
Oh, cool.
Off the top of my head. But she's more known as an actress. But that record, there's just so much ear candy and so many layers of background parts and stuff like that. It was really fun to really take that record and spread it apart. And when I did it, I did the first song. I got contacted by the record company. They said, you're going to do this record, but we want you to do one song first. And she wants to come and listen to it and make sure we're in the right direction. It's okay, no problem. So I did the one song and she came down and she loved it. And then she started playing me the rest of the album, like off her phone. Oh, you're going to love this one. Oh, this one. And she kept doing this with her hands. I mean, I know nobody can see me, but like she was just moving her hands constantly when she was talking about this record. And I kept looking at her going, she's moving this way. So I tried in that record, it's funny nobody else can, but if you look at the ADM, the renderer playing the little green balls, there's so much stuff moving around, but most of it is very subtle. You don't really hear it as movement. It's just kind of, but when I turned it off, it definitely got a little more static. But if I put something in the back, it might be just rotating a little bit, not to the point again where you hear it rotating, but you feel it. So there's so much stuff moving, very subtly moving on that record. And that was all based on her hand movements when she was explaining stuff to me. But the background parts, again, on that record, they're really cool parts for one. It really lent itself to moving stuff around and pushing backgrounds places in the room. I had an awful lot of stuff to work with on that record.
Yeah.
Lots of string paddy type stuff. So I could really fill the room with sound. And when you have a record where you can naturally fill the room with sound like that, then it's easier to do some more drastic stuff, putting background vocals in the ceiling and stuff like that, because it's already full. So it's not like, this background part came out of nowhere and it's behind you. There was a lot of stuff behind you to begin with. So
I think that stuff sounds really fun. And that sounds like it's going to be fun to make records that way too. And hearing you talk about the mic placement too, just a reminder to us rock stars, even if we're ready to know what to do with something like Atmos, even if you're like, oh, that would be cool one day, but I don't have a studio that's like that yet, or you're thinking about doing headphones, I guess, based on what you said, you can always just record like you're recording for stereo and just throw up additional, throw up sounds like the wrong word to use, but put up additional mics and, check them just to see if they sound kind of cool, knowing that when you get ready to revisit this as an Atmos mix, that might be really handy to have,
Totally. Yeah. The great thing, especially nowadays, with unlimited, I guess you're limited in the amount of microphones and preamps you have, but, you can record 4 mics on a source and mute 3 of them. It's okay. Yeah. I know a lot of us talk about everybody's, why you don't need to record 4 mics on each guitar, blah, 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 and you don't. But
this is a place where
that might work. Yeah. You don't need 4 of them right next to each other, put it that way.
Yeah.
Everybody always jokes like, what do you do when you get, a guitar cabinet with 4 mics? Well, I mute 3 of them probably.
Right.
So
yeah, nice.
I find the one I like and then I mute the rest. But you can put a room mic up, it might work.
Yeah. And one place we need to, of course, remember is we may have only so many inputs into our interface. So, but if we're recording drums first and other instruments, makes it a little easier to do that. And who knows, maybe our studios will start to have a lot of us get used to having a pair of room mics up or a stereo mic that we just kind of use all the time on the next overdubs and things like that. So maybe we'll just have a bunch of Atmos mics ready to go.
Maybe. And, even in a small room, a couple mics in the corners might not work in stereo, but it might work just fine in Atmos. Because again, you're splitting them apart.
Yeah. Yeah. We had talked about this before, but I saw it on your Instagram. I think you were giving another shout out to the Vanguard V44S microphone. Speaking of stereo mics and room mics, are you still using that on sessions? And have you found it pretty handy for anything in particular? And then I guess we can just give a shout out to Vanguard if you want to, and tell the rock stars about that mic.
Yeah, Derek, he makes great mics. When I saw it at probably an NAMM show or an AES show a few years ago. And, I've been using C24s for years because we had a couple at Capitol. They're great mics. I really like stereo mics. They come in handy. They're easy because it's 2 mics in one. I used to do a lot of stuff that was for radio broadcast, and it was really cool to put stereo mics as overheads and stuff like that, because when they sum to mono, they kind of sum perfectly to mono. And then I would use them. The C24s are kind of bulky because they have a power supply and then they have a pattern. There's 2 boxes and big cables, and the mounts, they're not real flexible as far as being able to maneuver them. They're very big, so they sound good, but they're kind of difficult to work with in a fast scenario, moving them around. So when I saw that mic, I really liked it. And then Derek sent one to me a few years ago at Capitol just to play around with for a week or so. And I really liked it. And And I promised him I wouldn't put it up next to a C24, and then I did. And amazingly, it held up. It's not a tube mic. It's a it's a condenser. He's doing a tube version of it. I think he's got a prototype now. But it held up to the C24. In some instances, we liked it better. It's got a tiny bit more mid-range than a C24. At least the C24 I put it up against. You know, those old mics, you never know. But I really liked it. And then, you know, with Capitol being shut down, I didn't have access to the great mic collection, and I missed my stereo mic. So I bought one of those. And I use it. It's pretty much on every session I do now, somewhere, you know, whether it's a room mic or an overhead mic or something, you know, put it in front of the French horns or put it in front of strings. I love it for like the percussion overdub session, you know, where you have, you know, whoever, Luis Conte or Paulino De Castro, one of those guys, and they're out there and we're just doing overdubs on stuff. I'll just use that one mic and just move it around wherever I need it. Put it over the congas, put it over a shaker. Oh, it's a shaker, it's mono. Great, I only use one side of it. So, but it's in a mount where I can move it around really easily. And, you know, so I might do a whole percussion session with just moving that one mic around.
Yeah,
and
it's fun. It's fun just moving the mic on stuff in the session when you get into a good flow.
And it's a stereo mic, but it's also a really great mic. So, I mean, I've used it mono, you know, just use one side of it. And it's still a great mic. So, and bang for the buck, it's fantastic because you think about it, you're getting two mics, you know.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. I guess it does beg the question of whether traditional stereo mics, left-right, Blumline pair with figure eights. Do you see those translating?
By the way, I use it in Blumline most of the time.
Do you? Okay, cool. Yeah. I've noticed that they do sound different depending on how you switch it.
The stereo image is much wider with a Blumline because you have the nulls.
And do you think that the traditional stereo miking will translate to the new world of Atmos, or that the traditional stereo will apply mostly to the left, center, right up front?
No, I use it all the time for like height mics and stuff. Like on the Miles Davis stuff. The ceiling mics is 2 C24s.
I guess. Well, that's 2 space pair or
no 2 2 stereo microphones.
Oh, 2 stereo microphones.
I saw one in the front, one in the back.
Oh, right. Because it really
apart.
It's no different than your front left right. If you just looked up at your ceiling, it's a left right on the ceiling.
Exactly. Left right can be left right, can be front left right. It can be side and rear. It can be, right front right and side right. Yeah. There's all kinds of ways.
We're going to need 100 stereo microphones for this overdub.
Exactly. The more mics, the better.
Okay, let's see here. What else did I want to ask you about? So let's give a shout out for a moment to something that I believe you kind of invented for Atmos mixing. And I know this gets a little advanced, but in Atmos, there's a concept of beds, which it's sort of funny. I don't even know who came up with the term bed, but this basically like a bus that goes to the stereo left and right speakers, I think, and you can send stuff to that in a traditional stereo. And then there's the, the other pairs of speakers, or there's the sub. But then there's also objects, and you kind of came up with and the objects allows you to move something anywhere to any speaker. If I'm saying this right.
Sort of. So if you think of it, the bed is a Dolby thing. So the first 10 channels this is where it gets really confusing.
Right.
So
we're going to nerd alert, rock stars.
This big time nerd alert here. And again, I did a master class a couple weeks ago, and trying to explain this to people, I was confusing myself trying to explain it because you're talking about 7.1 and 7.1.2 and 5.7. So really quick, the bed is the first 10 objects in the render are what they call the bed, and you have to have a bed. There's, you have to have at least one. And basically the bed is a channel-based part of Atmos. So it's the left channel, the center channel, the right channel, the two sides, the two rears, and two ceiling speakers.
Basically, one of those mono, going to one part of the bed goes directly to a speaker. To
that speaker, yes. Right. Now, where it gets weird is, the bed could, if you're in a movie theater that's really deep, the side speaker might be 4 speakers.
Right.
But it's just one channel. If that makes sense. But in the bed, those channels are usually tied to where speakers are in the room. It's more of a channel-based thing. And the bed is always 7.1.2. It's got 2 channels in the top. So if you have 2 speakers above your head, it will go, to the left top and the right top. If you have 4 speakers above your head, you'll have mono left overhead and mono right overhead. It will be coming out of 2 speakers, but like a phantom center. The same signal will be going to the front and the back of each side.
Right.
So even though you have a 7.1.4 playback system, speaker system in the bed, you still have 7.1.2 going to the ceiling.
That's easy to
understand. This is where it gets confusing. Yeah.
That's easy. That's easy.
Yeah. And then the objects, then you have another 118 objects available to you. And the objects are not speaker-based at all. The objects move through space, and it's the renderer's job to get them to come out of where you put that object. So for instance, like when I'm moving an object, I'm never thinking about pretty much when I'm mixing an Atmos, I'm never thinking about where speakers are. I'm just taking the object and throwing it. I want it to come out over there. And then the playback system you're listening to it on, whether it's your studio or your home theater or movie theater, whatever it is, it says, okay, I'm controlling, if you're in a movie theater, it might be like, I'm controlling 30 different speakers. And I have to get object 10 to come out of here. So I'm going to make it come out of the speaker that's closest to that, or the 2 speakers that are closest to that, or whatever that scenario is. If you're at, like in my system here, I have a 7.1.4 playback. If I put something to the right between the back and the front, halfway to the back, well, in my system, it's going to come out, the actual speakers that are moving air are probably the right side and the right. It's going to be a phantom center over there or a variation of it. That's the renderer's job to figure out how to get it to come out there. And the renderer's job in the playback system. So every playback system essentially has a renderer attached to it, whether it's your home theater or your studio.
Yeah, and
so the objects move freely.
Let me reiterate that just to make sure it's getting across to Rockstars. The challenge with this Atmos system is you don't know what somebody's going to listen to it on. They might listen on headphones. They might listen on a sound bar. They might listen with so many speakers surrounding them in a space. They might listen in a theater with a whole lot of speakers. And that's also the beauty of it, is it's this design where, hey, let's come up with something that should function no matter where you're listening to it and how you listen to it.
Exactly.
That's sort of
the goal,
right?
idea. That's the goal. And yes, and it's agnostic to the speakers. So it's a way of putting stuff in places, whether there's a speaker there or not. Now, I equate speakers to resolution when you're talking about that. The more speakers you have, the better resolution you have. Right? Because the more speakers, if it's going to be pinpointed. If you have a speaker between your right front and your right side, if you have a wide speaker there, like in a 916 system, well, it's going to come out of that speaker by itself. So more resolution. So that's where it gets weird when you talk about the bed. When the numbers, when you start talking about 712, 714, 916, that's where it gets weird as to whether or not you're talking about the beds, the virtual beds in the renderer, or you're talking about the playback system you're listening on.
Yeah.
Because they kind of sit on top of one another.
And then the next step is you said, hey, what if we just make everything an object and consider those beds and point them in the right direction or something?
So sort of what happened is I realized very quickly through different problems we had that, especially when you're dealing with the sides and the ceiling, if you're using the bed, the Dolby bed, well, that's dependent on the room that you're in. So a great example is at Capitol, we had a very long room. So we had 6 speakers over the top, right? 3 down each side. Right or wrong, when we set the room up for the bed, the 712 bed, we made it the center 2 speakers. Right? So if you send something to the bed at Capitol, it came out the center 2 speakers. It didn't come out of the wide ones at all. Well, obviously that's okay if you have a 712 playback system or a 714 playback system. But in this case, we had a 9-1, or actually probably more like a 1216 or whatever it was. So suddenly I lost control as a mixer of where it was coming out. Same with the sides. Depending on what speakers are assigned to the side bed channel, I lost control. But with an object, doesn't matter where the speakers are. It's going to come out of that spot in the room. So what I did is, to get around the bed thing and to keep control, I took a bunch of objects and assigned them to spots in the room, left, center, right, side wide, side here, side there, in the back, tops. I paired objects. So 2 paired to in the IO setup, you can pair 2 together. So when I came up with what I called them originally, I called them zones. So I could send something to the front zone, through my main output in Pro Tools. And then if I wanted it to come out of the top, I could have an aux send. So these went to aux channels in Pro Tools where those objects were assigned and they were static. I could send to the front, left, right, and then I could take a send in Pro Tools, for instance, and send to the center. And by pushing that fader up in Pro Tools, I could decide how much was in the center channel. And if I wanted some in the sides, well, then I could send it to the 2 objects, through the aux, to the objects to the sides, and I could push the little fader up and get it to come up. And I had complete control over how much of that signal I wanted it, I wanted where.
Yeah.
The other thing about an object is a single point in space. So say, for instance, you take a lead vocal and make it object 21, and you put it front, left, and right, it's going to come out of the center speaker because there's a speaker there.
Right.
Well, if I send it to an aux that's objects 11 and 12, and 11 is the left speaker and 12 is the right speaker, well, now I've got a phantom center, which I like better anyway. So it was a way of me, again, regaining control of the mix and thinking that it's going to translate better to the playback systems by using the objects, because the objects are not tied to a channel. It's the renderer's job to get it to come out of where I say. And the renderer does that really well.
So that was
at some point we started calling it the object bed when the other guys got, I was telling the other guys at Capitol, like, oh, look at this. This is really cool. And they were like, yeah, that's great. And it really worked.
Yeah.
Now it's really easy because in the latest version of Pro Tools, they have a track preset called object bed, and
nice.
It just does it for you.
They're listening. So that came up on the podcast not too long ago, this concept of a center speaker that when you send something to left and right and you have a phantom center, there's actually a dip or something in the upper mids, and that it was suggested that our favorite vocal mics, one of the reasons they all have a peak in the upper mids or a little bit of a boost, was to fill that back in again, and that the if you send a vocal straight to the center speaker, our favorite mics aren't necessarily our favorite mics anymore. And you just mentioned liking the phantom center over the center speaker as a center for vocal. Unless I misheard you.
No, I did. But I don't think that's as much to do with frequency response as it is to do with the space. When you send, for instance, a vocal only to the center channel, it's very kind of in your face. And singers don't like it when you put their dry vocal in the center speaker, as we found out the hard way. But what I do is I can use, like, if I'm mixing, unless I want something as an effect to be very poignantly right in the center. But for something like a vocal, I'll use a phantom center, but I will push some of it into the center channel, and I use that to kind of anchor stuff where I want it. So if I want something to stay in the front, no matter where you are, I want to pull it into the room a little bit, but I still want it to feel like it's coming out of the front. So I can use the center speaker to kind of anchor it there. In bigger systems, obviously, if you walk more to the left, suddenly the vocal shifts to the left. That's just the room does that.
Yeah.
But in Atmos or in surround, you're kind of trying to keep the sweet spot kind of wide. So by using the center channel, a bit, you can, I would say, like, for a vocal, for me, maybe 20% of it is in the center channel.
Yeah. So the anchoring,
80% of it.
It reminds me, and of course, as you pointed out, more than two speakers, that's been around for quite a while for film. And I remember hearing it suggested that, like, the center speaker is where you might want to put your dialogue, because you want it to always come from the middle of the screen. You don't want it to shift over. And I mean, I've gotten the last seat at the movie theater before. In fact, I had to watch the new Maverick that way, and it was not a lot of fun. Right. Because you're like way off center, and if the voices don't sound like they're coming from when they're supposed to, that can really throw you off, I suppose.
Yeah, like if I'm mixing something specifically for a film, I'll kind of stay away from the center speaker, because I know that that's where the dialogue goes.
Right.
And if I put something in there, it's just going to get squashed to put the dialogue in there. So stay away from it. If it's a song, it might be different, because there's probably no dialogue in a song with vocals. But yeah, for movie score stuff, I won't put a whole lot in the center channel.
So let me ask you this question next. So what do you want to say about all the rest of us getting into Atmos as an indie or a home studio? Should we what's a smart way to begin messing around with it?
So, anybody can download the software. I think it's a couple $100 for the renderer. And once you get it set up, which takes a second to do, you can just listen to the binaural in the headphones. I would suggest that to a point. I would suggest that if you're dipping your feet in and you want to see how this thing works, and, will my computers run it, stuff like that, But I think if you've never done a mix on speakers, you're going to have a really, really, really hard time doing it just in headphones.
Right.
And the thing even though at this point in time, most consumers are probably listening to it on headphones, whether they know it or not, the master file is actually the speaker mix. The binaural technology is literally changing by the day. They're constantly changing the binaural algorithms to make it better. They don't always say so, but I would assume that every time you update your iOS in your iPhone, there's probably a tweak to the binaural playback.
Yeah.
So that's a moving target. It's changing a lot. And usually a mix done only in headphones doesn't translate to the speakers very well. We can usually pick them out pretty quickly. So I don't think, again, if you've done a bunch of mixes and well, I know that if I put this here, it's not going to sound right, because I've tried it before. So I would suggest headphones are fine for playing around, for learning the system, stuff like that. Once you want to get real and actually do stuff for people, you're going to need a playback system. And I would say it doesn't matter what, you don't need $100,000 worth of PMC speakers or anything like. You can do it with any speakers you want. I would highly suggest matched speakers, at least matched as far as the brand, so that there's some consistency moving from front to back and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest if you're going to mix music, that a 714 system is the smallest system you're going to want to start with. And again, it's not inexpensive, but you can get like a Cali Audio system. They're great systems, and I think you can get a 714 system for $6,000 or $8,000, something like that, which is not it's not an inconsequential amount of money, but it's you don't have to mortgage your house to do it.
Now, for somebody who's thinking about creating for Atmos in their home studio, do you think that you could make some production and creation decisions with the binaural to start with?
Absolutely.
That would be, and then you could sort of make sure that they were balanced right once you went to a proper mastering set. I mean, a mixing setup.
Now, like the one thing you can't do is because of the latency in the renderer, you wouldn't be able to listen through a render and do an overdub, for instance, or track a band because you're going to have tons of latency.
Right.
In that scenario, though, you can set up, like if you're in Pro Tools, just set up a 714. It's not going through the render at that point, but a 714 channel-based track.
Right.
And you can track in 714 and then easily port that over to Atmos in the mixing process. But you can hear it. You could monitor in that. You could monitor in quad and be,
But you'd still have to set up speakers in your studio to do that.
Absolutely.
You can't monitor in headphones a 714, right?
No, that's just a fold down, and that gets weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, you could play around with stuff. Again, you're going to be hearing latency if you're going through the render, just because it's a very powerful computer program. So it takes some time. So I think at that point, there's some give and takes in what you can actually do live. But yeah, you could. I mean, again,
right.
I would say, if you're thinking about it, get the system and check it out, but don't be under the impression that you can do it only in headphones.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is it's okay if you're not doing Atmos. Like if you don't have clients that are asking you for it, then why spend the money? I mean, if you want to do it, that's great. Just because we're engineers and we want to, dip our hands into everything and tear our studios apart every year and redo it and everything else. So I'm not saying not to do it, but I certainly wouldn't go out and spend, $10,000 on an Atmos system if nobody's asking you to do that.
Right.
Totally. It's very much not a if you build it, they will come thing.
Right.
Just because you have an Atmos room doesn't mean you're going to get work.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. As a creator, I think a takeaway from what you've suggested is feel free to use headphones to play around with the object stuff and begin to explore like, oh, that's how it works, and this is, you can move things around. And as if you want to start creating music that might be, the placement and the production is intentionally in Atmos, then you could start with a simple 714 set of speakers, something affordable, and set it up pretty rudimentary in your space, and then and record that way. And then when you're ready to start mixing, then you turn on the renderer and start, moving objects around and rebuild your mix that way or whatever.
Absolutely.
Or I guess I guess your overdubs would already be routed to beds, and then maybe you just redirect them as objects to, new places.
Yeah, at that point, it wouldn't be that difficult to figure out.
Yeah,
how to make one into the other.
That's fascinating. Well, we're near the end here, but let me ask you this question: do you have any particular software plugins, anything like that you're just sort of really digging at the moment, something you're excited about, or anything that is sort of bridging the gap between stereo and Atmos?
What do I have? So PSP just put out a new compressor that's a multi-channel. It does up to 916, I believe. And I'm blanking on what it's called right now, and I'm recording this on my Pro Tools system, so I can't look at it. I think it's the Oral Comp, something like that. That's pretty cool. The newer version of Pro Tools, once they've expanded the track width, so we can do all these and put these, the Dolby Atmos track presets in there. I know a lot of people overlook the track presets in there, but for Atmos, Avid actually put some nice ones in.
The PSP Oral Comp, yeah, I just pulled it up too. That's the one that does multi-channel compressor and limiter.
Right, that one's cool. What else? Actually, at the AES last week or whenever it was, Eventide just released 2 new immersive plugins: the Micro Pitch Shift, and what's the other one called? I don't remember off the top of my head.
That'll be cool. Makes it sound sort of like 3-dimensional chorusing.
Yeah, it's kind of like the pitch shift that we all used in the H3000, but now it doesn't immerse, and they do it really well. So those are kind of the 2 new plugin things that I've seen literally in the last couple months.
Are we going to have to start converting our guitar amps to 714 and having?
Yeah, you're just going to need walls of guitar amps
and guitar pedals that have 9 input jacks and output jacks.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure stuff like that. I mean, maybe not guitar amps, but I'm sure you'll start seeing keyboard patches that are immersive and stuff.
No, they're all going to be
virtual.
Digital guitar amps. You'll see virtual ones that do.
Yeah, the VST
play
stuff.
All around
absolutely.
You.
I'm sure that's coming. Again, we're in such the early times that the tools are just now really starting to come out. Liquid Sonics has been doing really great immersive reverbs for a while. Who else? Waves has a immersive compressor that's really nice. The Fab Filter stuff is now Atmos compatible or immersive.
I saw the Fab Filter was in the Beatles video. Yeah, I don't know if that was you. I don't know if it was your. It might have been on your session.
I don't know because I wouldn't have used an EQ on
this. Probably a mix thing, or
exactly.
Maybe they were.
I'm sure it was all over the place. I used the Fab Filter EQ all over the place.
Me
that's
too.
the one I have in my my little preset thing. Is that's my go-to for especially for surgical stuff. I love the Fab Filter as a dynamic EQ. I use it for that a lot. If you have a vocal that when somebody sings out, sometimes they get a little harsh. You can just use a dynamic EQ and take out some of that harshness just when they get loud, stuff like that. It's effectively a de-esser. It'll work as that. That's basically what a de-esser is a high frequency compressor,
Yeah.
So I love it, but they have a new reverb. I haven't heard it yet, but I think their new reverb is Atmos compatible too.
Very cool. Well,
we keep saying Atmos, but we should say there is a Sony system too, the Sony 360 system.
Yeah.
So I haven't personally mixed in it, but it's still there. It's out there. It's valid. People are using it. So
yeah, no, we've had discussions about that on the podcast as well. It's I guess when I do think about these interviews, sometimes I'm like, well, we can only cover so much ground in one. So if you're, I have talked to some guests who really have both systems going in the same studio, and like you said, we're engineers at heart, so we rise to the challenge of complexity sometimes,
Yeah, I'm getting away from that. I like it to keep it simple, and once it's working, I'm loath to change it.
Yeah. Well,
I'll try new stuff, but I don't like changing my system.
Your records are a
too
testament
much.
to if it sounds great, stick to it. So
yeah, and I
Rockstars please go listen in the show notes too. Just a reminder that we've got the playlist of all these great Atmos mixes, and you can hear them in stereo too. They'll just be the, I guess for some of them they would be. Would some of those be your stereo mix, or are they pretty much?
There's probably there's some stuff on there where I've done both.
Yeah, the older.
It's really fun when you can do both. Yeah. But I mean, I would say at this point, Atmos is maybe half of what I do. Maybe. I mean, I'm still, out recording. I got to say, my phone is blowing up and getting text messages because I have a session tomorrow at East West. I'm still out recording as much as I possibly can. I'm still working in stereo as much as I'm working in Atmos. So, it's not, I don't just sit here, there's sometimes days or weeks where I only turn on the 2 speakers. So I like being able to do a lot of it. I still love going out and recording, especially big orchestras and stuff. The more people you put in that room, the happier I am. I love it. It's great.
Well, we really appreciate you taking out so much time to come hang with us on the podcast again. Steve, thank you. Let me ask you this question. This is our closing question, which I hit you with this last time, but we'll do it again. And maybe this time, maybe you can kind of rewind to before you did all this immersive mixing or something if you want. But the question is, we take the Wayback Studio machine and you get to go back in time and ask yourself, or go back and give yourself some advice. And you say, listen, Steve, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice do you want to go back and give yourself if you could? And is there anything, I don't know, related to the Atmos mixing that you'd go back and tell yourself?
What would I tell myself? Listen. It's all about listening and paying attention. Watch those guys that are sitting in the chair. I mean, it's kind of what I did. Yeah. But that's you can learn a lot from books, and you can learn, in my day it was books and Mix magazine and stuff like that. But actually being in the studio and paying attention to what, watching people who are really great at it make records or movies or whatever it is really the key. Keep an open mind and know that eventually you'll get to work on a Beatles record.
Nice, man. Nice. And, just a testament to that too, because I think you started out as a night runner, you said, and you assisted on records and you sat with Al. And just a reminder, when we do sit and watch people, sometimes it's easy to space out, and I think that can be that's a part I remember that was hard about my internship, was like, don't just zone out on a session, keep refocusing yourself, because stuff happens and you miss it otherwise. Especially
nowadays, you don't want to be in the back of the room on your phone, stuff like that. And a lot of times, especially with Al, we would do like the mix with the masters and stuff. And I would tell people, I would have to like tell the people who were attending the seminars, like, don't wait for him to, him making the record might not be him turning knobs and pushing faders. A lot of it happens, him changing the bass sound could be him going out and talking to the bass player. So, and he's never gonna, very rarely would he ever like go to the drummer, like, can I hear the kick? The drummer would just be out there playing and he'd just get the drum sound, like when a lot of that is the way I do things now because I watched him do it for so long. But when I'm getting drum sounds, it's like, just play something for me. Just play, I'll get it, and then I start with the overheads and go to the kick drum. Once in a while, if something's weird, I'll ask, but pay attention, man. You got to pay attention. And, a lot of times the biggest lessons I learned watching people were what not to do. So that's a big thing too. Now I don't have to make that mistake because that dude just made it and he's paying for it. So, but yeah. And also especially when you're getting started, there's a lot of jobs in audio, a lot of jobs. And it could be that, you think you want to be, mixing pop music, but it turns out down the line, you're really good at editing dialogue for films. And you didn't even know that existed when you got into the business. But that's what you're really good at, and that's what you really like. So, I mean, my career has taken a path I never thought it would take. I didn't think I'd be recording orchestras and film scores and big band records and stuff like that. But I liked it. So keep an open mind. There's tons of jobs out there, and, different kinds of jobs. And, you have to find the one that you like, that works with you and your lifestyle and personality and family and everything else. So it's, maybe you like being on the road, go on the road. Who knows?
That's true, because you've been doing live stuff too as well. You've had a lot of
I mean,
experiences.
I did like front of house early on, like clubs and stuff. Now, if I'm doing live stuff, it's usually going out and recording live shows.
Yeah.
And then bringing it home and mixing it, or live broadcast stuff. You know,
like you do the Oscars or something like that.
I'm part of the team that works on the Oscars every year. We just started this new thing. My friend Chris Walden has his new Pacific Jazz Orchestra. We had a first concert last weekend. And those, right now, I'm just doing the recording for those shows, but eventually we'll be live streaming them, in which case I'll do the live broadcast. So very rarely am I ever mixing front of house anymore. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I do go out. I enjoy going out and recording gigs. Yeah.
And Rockstars, if you do go out and do some live club gigs, bring your freaking earplugs. Be careful. It gets loud in there.
And it doesn't have to be loud. Turn it down. It's okay.
It doesn't have to be loud. And after you've EQ'd something, the rest of it is just turning the fader up and down a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Faders are your friend.
So Steve, let the Rockstars know how they should find you online. Where do you want them to go and learn more about you? Or what if they need to mix their next hit record in Atmos or stereo or whatever?
Usual place. I have a Facebook page and I have an Instagram that I'm not on all that. I'm more active on Facebook than Instagram. I have a website, stevegenewick.com. I try to keep it up to date. There's, if I do a video or a podcast or something like that, I try to get it up there as soon as I can. So there's a lot of information. There's fun pictures and stuff up there too. So that's probably the best thing.
Awesome. Well, we can't wait to be up there. Steve, thank you so much for hanging with us, man. It's great to see you as always. I look forward to seeing you out in California at the next thing.
Yeah.
And
I'll probably see you guys at the NAMM show, right?
Yep, indeed. And Rockstars, thanks for listening. And thanks, Steve, for hanging with us, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right, cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: Lewitt, Grace Design, Adam Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes below, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Wasilchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.